Hello everyone, welcome to What If Naruto Was Superman's Brother movie. Before we start, please go support Dragneel Slayer for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistaken character's gender, but of course Naruto is a male. One of Krypton's greatest scientists has set out to create a new Krypton and save his own civilization from complete destruction. And to do so, he has carried out the worst of practices. Superman is the man of steel, the last son of Krypton, the strongest being on planet Earth, survivor of the destruction of his home. And yet, he is no longer the last Kryptonian. Chapter 1. Author's note. This story, as the title indicates, is an alternate storyline of the Naruto. The super story, set 4 years before the start of Young Justice and the events that follow, so the Naruto of this story will have more training and development than his variant of the other line, and will follow a pattern similar to this one. As you know, Naruto from Super Saiyan is a Superman clone created by Cadmus using the cells and abilities of various DC heroes and villains. While he may not possess the same abilities as his variant, he is much better, having followed a process similar to Doomsday himself. Evolution through death and resurrection through cloning to the point of complete overcoming and evolution of his cells and body. This Naruto's development will be somewhat more sedate, as he won't fight or have any powers from the start beyond enhanced strength and senses. While the Naruto from the Super is far superior from the start and with less room for improvement, this one has a much greater development margin than his counterpart, bordering on the point of surpassing him if the opportunity arises. About his partner, it's likely that it will be a harem, but I haven't decided beyond a girl who I know will be with Naruto during the first stages of the story and who will be the cause of the greatest character development. The story is partially based on the Superman and Lois series, a series I'm hooked on, but it will lead into the events of Young Justice and everything that follows. Of course, it won't be faithful to Young Justice, either, as this story is an alternate version of the Super, and this Naruto has to follow his own steps and his own story. But that said, I hope you enjoy the chapters. Krypton. 1 year before its destruction. Slowly, planets die. It's something no one in the entire universe can fix, only delay. When the star that gives life to a galaxy goes extinct, the planets follow suit. This was precisely what was happening to Dawn Krypton. Despite the warnings, the attempts of a portion of the population to save the planet, Kryptonian life was in its final stages, on the last line. And everything was made worse by the civil war between those who favored saving the planet and those who didn't believe in its destruction. The clash between the two sides led Krypton to hasten its own death, and its life slowly began to fade away. Those charged with saving Krypton's memories, its history, were in a bunker deep within Krypton, safeguarding what could be used in the future to re-establish Kryptonian civilization on another planet, with other people. It was, of course, overly optimistic thinking on the part of the scientists to think they could re-establish Krypton on another planet. But at least they had set out to try to ensure their civilization wouldn't fall into oblivion, that they wouldn't be erased from existence. It was precisely because of this that the men and women of the bunker created the Ark, an immense spaceship filled with Kryptonian DNA samples obtained from various important people within Kryptonian society. They had also been tasked with transferring a vast amount of Kryptonian relics into the Ark, as well as almost unlimited information about the planet, its technology, and its customs. All so that the survivors of the catastrophe could rebuild what they were losing. Creating a new Krypton was the main objective of everyone inside the bunker, and the Ark was the tool those survivors would use to carry out the project of the new Krypton. One man stood out among all the scientists gathered in the bunker. With glasses covering his blue eyes, he gazed from the catwalk at his beautiful work of art. The Ark. He was the one who had brought all those men and women together. He was the one who had carried out Project Ark, while Kryptonian politicians argued and fought a war, leaving the planet to its fate, with the lives of millions of Kryptonians hanging in the balance. But the man wasn't foolish when he put the plan into action. He couldn't save his entire people, all his companions and brothers. Attempting to carry that out could lead to complete destruction for the rest of the universe, as not everyone in that place was completely stable. Stress had driven many Kryptonians to insanity, and allowing one of them to go to another planet could lead to its eradication. No, that wasn't his plan from the beginning. He'd used his companions to bring the Ark to a safe harbor, and soon they'd be off to fly across the sky toward the planet his navigator had pointed out without a single Kryptonian on board. Not one of them, anyway. The work of the man who created the Ark wasn't just that of an engineer or scientist. His field of work was always focused on biology, on genetics, to the point where he prepared what was called the Final Judgment, Krypton's perfect weapon against any possible enemy. And this weapon was included among the things on the Ark, something he of course didn't tell anyone else. Letting them know he was sending Krypton's finest weapon to a distant planet would only cause him more trouble than necessary in the short term and hinder his work he'd completed with his most recent creation. Outside of Krypton, its inhabitants derived powers from the yellow sun, making them beyond mere mortals for any inhabitants of planets blessed by these suns. Because of Rao, the enormous red giant that orbited the planet Krypton, no one on the planet could use the powers the yellow stars gave their bodies. And the man studied this thoroughly. Since the creation of Reckoning, his best work to date, he studied the effects of different suns on Kryptonian cells, obtaining the expected results. Yellow suns gave enhancements to any Kryptonian, and the red sun weakened them until they became ordinary beings, without powers. However, he obtained some encouraging data when he obtained tests with a blue sun. If the cells improved in the light of a yellow sun, with a blue sun the improvement was completely overwhelming. That was what he sought after completing his Judgment Day project. Creating a Kryptonian with powers that surpassed any other, with no apparent weaknesses, had been his dream ever since he began his genetic studies. He used all the data obtained from his first subject and ensured that tiny baby could adapt, grow, and evolve in the planet's harsh wastelands, all while enhancing the infant cells so that they would always be charged with the energy of the blue sun. He was on the right path to creating a Kryptonian capable of even surpassing Judgment Day. That was his goal. To create a new weapon that could surpass his first invention and be completely true to himself, for the scientist was determined to escape Krypton with the Ark and its precious weapons, his grand genetic projects that created the super Kryptonians inside that enormous evacuation ship headed for Earth. But his plans were thwarted by the interference of someone who wasn't too happy with his personal project. He wasn't afraid that this person would ruin all his plans, but he did prevent him from entering the Ark when it was finally launched into space. What was on that ship? The Kryptonian scientist turned on his heels as the Ark headed toward Earth, the peaceful planet where his creations could re-establish Krypton from the ground up by taking the essence of the newly conquered planet. General Zod. I didn't expect to see you around the bunker anytime soon. You've even shattered any predictions I had about your actions in this regard. Zod Korkrupt was one of Krypton's most exceptional exponents, a general in charge of all the planet's military forces and currently Krypton's #1 enemy due to his own desire to obtain the planet, being the main cause of the planet's accelerated death. What was there? General Zod's gloved hands grabbed the man's neck, shoving him against the gangplank railing. Despite Zod's attempts to stop the Ark with his artillery, it failed to damage the ship in the slightest. Calmly, the scientist let his arms fall to his sides. It didn't matter if he died. It didn't matter if Krypton perished. For him, the Ark was his greatest pride, his greatest work to date, and he knew that even if he died there, at Zod's hands, he would see his plan fulfilled in the coming years, perhaps hundreds. If it's the codex you're after, I'm afraid I included it in the Ark to keep it out of your hands. I'm afraid your goal of ruling Krypton using your offspring or clones won't be possible, my dear brother. Zod and the scientist were brothers, both descended from the same father and mother, belonging to the same house of Krypton, and with similar aspirations. While Zod wished to rule Krypton completely, for which he had shed blood even now, killing the rest of the Kryptonians in the bunker, the scientist wished to be the ruler of the new Krypton that his Ark would succeed in creating on the planet Earth. You're an idiot. Zod pushed the man against the railing. He collapsed when his torso hit the railing, being held in place by his right arm, which wrapped around the railing to keep him from falling to the ground. Jor-El is on my trail, and you're keeping away my greatest weapon against the Kryptonian government. Didn't your studies give you knowledge of the Codex? All the work I've done, all the lives taken, all for nothing. There was frustration and anger mixed with disappointment and resentment in the general's voice. These feelings didn't reach the scientist's heart as he watched his older brother walk in front of him, his boots thumping as their soles hit the metal walkway. Despite being brothers and sharing a genetic makeup, neither Zod nor the scientist had found a middle ground to tolerate each other, so the relationship between them was almost non-existent. Without the Codex, my plans are now altered. The footsteps halted, and General Zod focused his eyes on his fallen brother, fixing a dark stare that might have sent anyone to their grave. I must then locate that ship and. The Ark cannot be found, brother. The Ark was currently traveling to Earth with the goal of being the tool to recreate Kryptonian civilization on Earth, to create the new Krypton. To this end, he intensified his efforts to ensure no one could locate his greatest creation. Neither Zod nor Jor-El could find the Ark and what it contained. You are. Their travel route has been erased, and the Ark itself cannot be found by any other ship. I've won, brother. I was always much smarter than you little idiot. The scientist's lips curved into a mocking smile that was all too clear to Zod's eyes. The general closed his hand into a gloved fist. It didn't take long for him to unleash his wrath on his brother, beating the Kryptonian furiously until his face turned into a mass of flesh and bone, a bloody pulp that made the man unrecognizable. Zod took his brother by the jacket, lifting the poor man slightly. Idiot. You were always too open in your thoughts about me, brother, one bred for war, the other bred for science. Zod never had a problem with that. He didn't care about his brother until he got in his way by taking the codex out of his hands. And that was just a fact he used to finally kill him. Always smarter, much better in our father's eyes. No, brother. Science won't save you from death. Are you sure, Zod? My job has always been to delay death itself, to keep that dark moment as far away from my flesh, from my body, as possible. I'll be able to return from the dead. But you? Oh, you poor wretch. You'll never get the codex. There were no more words, no reply. Zod remained completely silent as he dropped his brother from a height of 30 meters. A crunch echoed through the bunker, and when the general surveyed the impact site, he showed no remorse at seeing his brother's bloody body, a red stain on the cold metal. Zod dropped his face to the railing, feeling the cold steel against his skin. He had killed his brother, something that on Krypton was a heresy, an evil hated even by Krypton's worst enemies. But what could he do? The codex was taken from him, his brother sent him away, and Jor-El was right on his heels to stop him and send him to the zone. Zod's thoughts were cut off by the constant sound of footsteps. General Zod, don't move. The platoon of soldiers surrounded him, emerging from the bunker entrance and pointing their weapons directly at him. Leading all those Kryptonians was the one he had once considered a friend. Zod. Jor-El. Where is the codex, Zod? Zod Karkrypt raised his gaze towards the sky reddened by the red sun of Krypton, fixing his eyes on a lost point in all that vast space. Even I wonder, old friend. The guards brought the general to his knees and wrapped his wrists in shackles that were indestructible. Zod raised his head, watching among the guards as his own soldiers were restrained and arrested. What do you mean? Zod then looked at Jor-El. It's not something I'm going to say, proud, stubborn, and obstinate. Zod hated his recently murdered brother, but he wouldn't give his enemy the pleasure of gaining information about the codex and whatever his brother had planned. He was, along with his men, the only witness to the arc and the plans of that small group of Kryptonians. The codex is far from the council's hands, too many light years from Krypton. Be pleased that it's not in my hands, Jor-El. Someone beat you to that. Earth. 20,006, somewhere in the North Pole. Krypton ceased to exist a year after the Ark's voyage began, leaving no living beings behind after the planet finally exploded into hundreds and thousands of tiny fragments. There were no known survivors. None beyond a baby who was evacuated from the planet thanks to the foresight of his parents. Jor-El and Lara Lor-Van, who, far removed from everything the Kryptonians did to perpetuate the species, conceived their son Kal-El the primitive way, thus obtaining the fruit of their love in the form of an infant. The young boy was placed on an escape ship that carried the last son of Krypton to the planet Earth, to a small town known as Smallville. He was found by the Kent family, who took the infant in to raise him and hid the young Kal-El's powers from everyone else. This is how the Man of Steel arrived on the planet. Taking the name Clark Kent, the Kryptonian passed unnoticed among the people of Earth as just another person, someone no one would give a second glance unless absolutely necessary. But his alter ego, Superman, attracted every glance, every word, and every piece of news that spread around the world, making him a symbol of peace, a hero among heroes, someone who was clearly superior to the rest. His actions as Superman were known to everyone on the planet. There was nothing the Man of Steel didn't know, and no one could intimidate him when the suit that transformed him into Superman covered his body. However, when the glasses and clothes made him Clark Kent, almost no one took him seriously. It wasn't something Clark took too seriously, as he himself made things complicated to draw attention away from himself. It was one thing to be the center of attention as Superman, but it was another to be the center of attention as Clark Kent. But the last son of Krypton didn't grow up oblivious to what his parents had done, to what had happened on Krypton. Thanks to one of the crystals that traveled with him on the ship, Clark discovered the entire history of his home planet inside the Fortress of Solitude, where a Kryptonian AI explained to him the entire history of Krypton up to its tragic end, as well as helped him train his powers obtained from Earth's sun. The same sun that was harmless to the rest of Earth's inhabitants. Clark also learned about his biological parents and his people, learning about their weaknesses. Kryptonians had no weaknesses within Krypton, but outside the planet bathed by a huge red sun, weaknesses were diverse. Kryptonite became the hero's greatest Achilles' heel to the point of making his allies, Samuel Lane, hide or get rid of all the kryptonite on the planet so that no one could harm him, so that his enemies could not kill him with extreme ease. Knowing his weaknesses, Clark learned to live with them until he emerged as the great leader and hero he was. Over the years, he became a pillar for the world, a central figure uniting the Justice League, and an enormous barrier that villains had to overcome every time they invaded or attempted to destroy Earth. This had led the hero to create a huge list of enemies, both extraterrestrial and terrestrial, who would give anything to see his head severed from his body. And yet, thanks to his wife, Clark ignored his enemies. It's not that he wasn't worried about them, but he learned to handle each situation better, not worrying when it wasn't necessary, coming to understand that there was a solution to any of the dangers he, as Superman, might face. That philosophy had led him to emerge victorious from many confrontations and moments when his life seemed to hang in the balance. Superman was currently flying over the North Pole, accompanied by some members of the League. The Watchtower's satellites had detected a strange signal coming from the pole, one none of them had been able to detect before and which now sounded louder, like a distress call. Superman recognized the strange sound of that call. It had sounded the same when his cousin landed on Earth many years after him and very confused by his adult appearance when they met. "On your right, Sups." The man of steel flew directly toward the area signaled over his earpiece. He fell heavily onto the ice, engulfed by a strong cold wind and snow that almost completely covered him, causing him to disappear into the storm. Kryptonians didn't just gain powers from a yellow sun. Their bodies became nearly impenetrable, resistant to the weapons of any planet they visited and affected by few things in the universe. Their senses were enhanced to the point of becoming super senses. Smell, hearing, sight. There hadn't been a sense that didn't improve once a Kryptonian's body was bathed in a yellow sun, and they grew exponentially under the light of a blue sun, almost reaching the power of a true god. It was Superman's super eyes that found what they were looking for. At first, it went unnoticed, taking the form of an icy mountain jutting out of the frozen ground. Seconds later, thanks to an engraving with Kryptonian letters, the hero discovered that the formation wasn't ice or a pile of snow on a rock, but the ship they were looking for. "I found it." It was immense. Using his X-ray vision, Superman saw the full size of the Kryptonian ship. He captured the entire engraving and reconstructed it to form the phrase "the Ark." Krypton's last hope in his mind, and it was much safer to do so than to break through the ice to bring the ship completely to the surface. "He's from Krypton." The hero's voice came out hesitant, slurred, and halting. It had been a long time since he had encountered anything from his home planet, his cousin being the last Kryptonian he met after his encounter with Zod and his men, whom he had sent back to the Phantom Zone for imprisonment. "From your planet?" Superman didn't respond. Using his superior strength and speed, he tore through the ship's hull in an explosion of metallic clangs and shards of Kryptonian metal that scattered. The interior was larger. By this time, Superman had only seen the small ships he and his cousin had used to arrive on Earth and the enormous zone prison where the evil Kryptonians were imprisoned. But the Ark, as his fellow Kryptonians called the ship, was even larger and could be described as a space war cruiser that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could spell doom for Earth. Using his senses and his X-ray vision, Superman guided himself through that enormous cruise ship to a specific room from where the only heat signal on that ship came from. Superman quickly smashed the door, finding himself face to face with a cryogenic chamber containing a teenager. His features were soft and calm. His golden hair was a clear draw, but those marked cheekbones made Superman find them relatively odd, imagining a cat or feline rather than a Kryptonian. The murmur left Kal-El's lips seconds after his eyes caught the boy's name from the side of the cryogenic chamber. "He belongs to the House of El." The House of El was where he, Kal-El, son of Jor-El, came from. But his father never told him of any survivors other than his cousin Kara-Zor-El, so he found it both strange and comforting that another of his relatives was on Earth. "Have you found anything, Superman?" Clark Kent placed his right hand on a panel. A flickering blue light enveloped his hand for a second before a hissing sound indicated to the Kryptonian that the chamber was opening to his presence and identity. When the icy mist finally disappeared, Superman could fully see the young Kryptonian. He had an athletic body for his age, well built with no deformities or scars on his body. There were no blemishes beyond the strange whiskers on the teenager's slightly tapered face, and he seemed completely healthy, peaceful as he slept. I think I've found someone from my family." Chapter 2. Krypton's Last Hope. The Ark. It seemed like a mockery, a small joke about the Ark, mentioned in the clear and precise lines of the Bible. That ship that survived the flood, that kept the planet's living beings alive from God's wrath, bore a resemblance to a drop of hope from another civilization, another planet, another galaxy too far from Earth. It was, clearly, the same concept in both cases, one from the past and the other from a more recent time. Both arcs had saved, in completely different ways, something from their home planet. While Earth still had its inhabitants, the Ark brought the planet's history from Krypton, hundreds of relics that could be considered unique and extremely valuable, and brought with it a new survivor from Superman's home planet, something the League and the government kept completely secret, hidden from anyone linked to the press or the enemies of the Man of Steel. Soon, the area discovered by the League was cordoned off by General Lane's men. The United States Army took full responsibility for sealing off the area, covering up everything surrounding the Ark, and moving the valuable objects to a location hidden from public scrutiny, leaving few people aware of their correct location. Superman himself had pointed out that many of the objects could be used as weapons or artifacts that would create an imbalance between the powers or, if they fell into the wrong hands, could endanger the world. Unfortunately, the Ark couldn't be moved from its current location, not even with Superman's help. Anticipating the potential problems the Ark might encounter, its creator installed various defense systems that caused Superman to fall to his knees, powerless, on more than one occasion. A defense system powered by small compressed red suns prevented any super-powered Kryptonian from damaging the Ark. Using the knowledge he had gained in the Fortress of Solitude from his biological father, Kal-El, Superman deciphered the only way to move the ship from Antarctica. For the boy, the only living inhabitant of the Ark, to wake up and order the ship to move from that place to a completely different point, which would force him and General Lane to delay everything. No sooner had Guile been released from his cryogenic chamber than Superman arranged for the boy to be taken to a government-run medical facility, the same facility that had cared for him during his confrontations with villains who had somehow attempted to harm him. Clark trusted General Samuel Lane, who happened to be his father-in-law, the father of his wife, Lois Lane, the woman he worked with and later married. He also worked alongside the general during various incidents. Since his introduction to the world as Superman, he helped prevent global organizations from trying to eliminate him. This was mainly why he left his relative with the general and his men until he woke up. He knew that Lois's father wouldn't try to hurt one of his relatives if the latter didn't cause too much trouble, something Clark hoped wouldn't happen. When his cousin Kara appeared on Earth, she became aware of his situation and accepted him, living with a family Clark knew. Although she wasn't frozen or kept in a coma for long, and if the calculations were accurate, the Ark had been there for over 30 years, remaining hidden until a distress signal appeared on the watchtower, just like when Kara appeared in Earth's orbit. That worried Clark. Guile had been frozen and comatose for some 30 years, in a chamber created to preserve life, feeding his host until he was removed. 30 years of eating unstable, almost nutrient-depleted food that provided just enough to survive. 30 years frozen and completely comatose, cut off from the world around him. When Clark looked at the newest member of his family, he couldn't see a trace of aging on his body, not a single wrinkle, not a single scar. He looked just like his 15-year-old son, Jonathan. Young and athletic, maybe a little taller and more athletic than his own biological son. Superman had seen stranger things. His cousin Kara hadn't been older than him when she should have been, but that was tied to her time inside the Phantom Zone before escaping. Guile had been cryogenically frozen all those years on Earth. To what extent could Kryptonian technology keep a living being frozen in time? The Kryptonian didn't know of any technology that could accomplish such a feat, not without maintenance for 30 years, and not from Krypton, at least. The Man of Steel passed this information on to the League members present at the Watchtower when he returned to base, leaving Guile with the General's men and Lane himself in charge and caring for his recently discovered family member. Of course, this information unsettled his companions and friends a bit. And although he wouldn't admit it, Clark felt something strange while he was on the Ark and wasn't comfortable with all the test tubes and strange instruments near the area where Guile had been inside the immense ship. A thorough study of the Ark would provide the League and Clark himself with all the data, allowing them to respond to anything that happened to the immense ship. Despite being the last vestige of his own home planet, Clark was willing to have it wiped out if it was a problem for Earth, if it was truly as dangerous as he initially felt. It was strange. Standing in front of Guile's cryogenic pod, Clark felt as if his body was screaming at him to leave, to escape the ship, as if he were being stalked by a beast. He had almost imagined a gazelle being stalked by a lion, which made him wonder what the Ark was hiding, what their fellow creatures had smuggled into this ship they had dubbed Krypton's last hope. Having met Kryptonians like Zod during his time as Superman and others of his ilk, Clark was reluctant to use anything that came from the Ark until Guile awoke and could tell them of the true purpose of sending the ship to Earth, a ship that had been there for 30 years, covered in ice and snow away from anyone who could use it. However, it had now been disclosed to the world. The Ark's data was within the US military system and, consequently, would fall into the hands of high-ranking government officials, potentially leading to a future conflict. In a while we could have problems with the Ark. Cautious. Paranoid. Focused. Gotham's Dark Knight could be described with a variety of adjectives and none would be entirely wrong. The League member was one of those people who had a plan for everything, including one to destroy his fellow heroes, all of them. Such a level of paranoia might seem like complete madness, but Batman was one of the few heroes who observed everything with a critical eye, observing the reality of the situation. You mean? The League founders were currently the only ones inside the Watchtower, and they left the rest of their fellow heroes to their own devices and protect Earth from any threats. This was no longer an unusual practice. When things seemed to be getting out of hand, it was the founders who would gather at the base and make the best decisions, causing minor friction with some of their fellow heroes. Their use of Kryptonian technology. I don't question General Lane's work, but on other occasions, technology requisitioned by the government has ended up in the wrong hands. On several occasions, the League's work had been marred by the attacks on military bases to obtain requisition technology, creating far more problems than they had in the first place. With this in mind, Batman had focused his full attention on the Ark and all the technology it contained. In his years as Gotham's Dark Knight and a member of the League, he had never seen anything like it. Kryptonian technology wasn't abundant on any other planet in the galaxy and probably the universe. Small pieces of rock known as kryptonite were Clark's only reminder of the planet where he was born and a painful reminder for those affected by those glowing rocks. A huge ship frozen in the North Pole changed the entire perspective that anyone could have on Krypton and gave them too much to work with, which could translate into long-term problems due to the weapons that could be generated with all the technology inside the ship. I don't think they're that stupid, are they? Green Arrow looked at Flash with a raised eyebrow. Really, Barry? Has your intelligence dropped to the point where you don't even know what you're talking about? Barry Allen twisted his lips at the insult from his teammate and friend. The two heroes were close, as Barry himself sought advice from Arrow on how to work as a hero in his early days. If this technology gets into the hands of people like Luthor or others, we'll be in serious trouble, Martian Manhunter stated with a somewhat dry tone, admitting that humans would cause more harm than good to the world if they used the Ark. Do we know how to activate it? No. I'd say the only one who could activate the ship is the same boy I met on the Ark. New Krypton. Technology, relics, history. Those scientists packed everything they could into the enormous ship, hoping to restore the planet they lost. Their desire to rebuild was so great that they even brought the codex inside the ship. But they had to protect everything until the Traveler awoke from his slumber. Only he could activate the Ark, use its instruments, and all the available upgrades. How did you get him out of there, Clark? I simply placed my hand on the reader. For some reason, it activated and allowed me to remove the boy from his capsule. For some strange reason, that boy resembled his biological father and mother. He felt like a true family member. Surprisingly, he even reminded him of his son Jonathan in certain traits, almost as if he were a clone containing the blood, the DNA of his family. We'll keep an eye on the Ark, Aquaman sighed, knowing everything could get out of hand. The time ships from other planets had appeared, it always ended with a confrontation with aliens and otherworldly beings. If you can't access their systems, then we'll wait for the boy to wake up. Did you say he was your familiar? According to the cryogenic chamber he was held in, his name was Guile, with the House of Alterna in it. Kryptonians used the surname or house name and their own names, translating those into a hyphenated name in the transcription. That indicates he's my relative. A cousin perhaps, like Kara. Clark wasn't particularly reluctant to share information with his teammates, unlike Bruce Wayne aka Batman. The Kryptonian believed in teamwork, unity, and trust. That's why he told them about Kara when she arrived on Earth and why many of his little secrets were known to his teammates. This, of course, didn't mean Bruce didn't know more about him than the rest of the League. Didn't your father mention anything about a brother? I haven't spoken to him yet, Superman admitted. He'd gone straight to the watchtower after rescuing the boy and making sure the Kryptonian relics were being properly treated, at least the ones he'd been able to remove without Guile's intervention. I will when I can get the boy to the fortress and get a full study of him. As much as the government wants to create a medical facility that can cure us, I highly doubt they'll succeed. Samuel Lane had created and invested thousands of dollars in research to create a medical wing capable of curing any Kryptonian on Earth who stood on the side of justice. But like any world other than Krypton, the general's efforts only scratched the surface of what Kryptonian technology could do and help. Maybe with the Ark that will change, Clark, the beautiful raven-haired woman left her statement, giving the Kryptonian a light smile. Not everything that ship brought has to be a weapon. The Amazon glanced discreetly at Batman, earning a grunt from the man. Diana had hit the nail on the head. Bruce was thinking that the entire instrument inside the Kryptonian ship was a weapon, something they would use against them. How long will it take for the boy to wake up? It's been cryogenically frozen for about 30 years, maybe more. It's been on Earth that long, at least. They couldn't make a clear estimate or know if the long period in cryogenics might have caused anything psychological or physical to the boy. Working with unknowns kept them on their guard at all times. It might take a few weeks, a few months, Clark murmured without much conviction. He'd never been in a chamber like that before, so figuring out how long it would take him to wake up was pure speculation. 30 years of cryogenics will take its toll. Maybe I should take him out into the sun to recharge his cells. Whenever Superman was in trouble, he turned to the yellow sun to recover, to come back stronger. Recognizing his weaknesses and moments of weakness, Clark deduced that his relative could recover using the same method, clearly believing that he was an ordinary Kryptonian like himself, that his physiology was similar to his own, and that the yellow sun could heal him. That man got him out of that mistake. We don't know exactly if he's like you, Superman, or if he's even a Kryptonian. You could end up hurting the boy by taking him off Earth. It would be best if you brought him back to the fortress if he doesn't regain consciousness in a reasonable amount of time. Clark nodded at Bruce's words. That way you'll get a complete workup of the boy. Knowing whether or not he was Kryptonian was crucial. Batman was right to put those points on the table, bringing a little more caution to Clark's mind. It was possible that Guile wasn't from Krypton, that he was an imposter. But then why the Kryptonian symbols? The Ark was definitely a Kryptonian ship and was called Krypton's Last Hope. The boy was definitely Kryptonian, even if Bruce's paranoid mind didn't see it as that simple. It's even possible that his cells are affected, that he can't absorb sunlight. We must be extremely careful with the boy. The time he spent cryogenically frozen must have affected his body in unexpected ways. That was the point on which everyone agreed. The length of time the boy spent cryogenically frozen would have affected him in one way or another, perhaps further impeding his own recovery and making it impossible for the results to be linear, predictable, and therefore, certain. Good, you're right. The Kryptonian nodded to the Dark Knight's advice, recognizing that the best course of action was to take Guile to the fortress before doing anything, to know his condition and that of his body, the effect that the cryogenics had on him. When he wakes up, I'll take him to the fortress. The meeting was interrupted by the ringing of a telephone. A light, high-pitched, and soft melody filled the Watchtower meeting room, halting all conversation. Lois. Clark. His wife's voice sounded strong and urgent. He's awake. Even if Clark hadn't had super hearing, he would have heard that scream from at least 10 kilometers away. The Kryptonian was sure his companions present had heard her scream. The boy? Yes. Just a few minutes ago. Subs. Clark Kent lowered his arm, and thus his phone. He looked at his fellow League members, his expression more relaxed. Shoulders squared, back straight. A smile crossed the Kryptonian's lips. The boy has woken up. Chapter 3. His mind seemed unaffected. His body reflected the appearance of a completely healthy 15-year-old teenager, with no visible scars on the outside or serious wounds on the inside. Despite all the checks performed by military doctors, Guile seemed unaffected by the time he had spent cryogenically frozen, away from the world around him. His blue eyes, golden hair and face reflected peace itself as he looked out the window, his hands clutching the sheets covering his legs, his torso completely uncovered, protected only by the thin hospital blanket given to all patients. The young Kryptonian had no birth scars, no deformities noticeable at first glance. He had no illnesses, and his entire system was responding as if he hadn't been kept in a coma for over 30 years. The scientist who had bred him had done so perfectly, leaving nothing to chance. He wanted to create a superior race of Kryptonians, and he seemed to have succeeded in creating Guile, information hidden from all who would see the young man from Krypton. Samuel Lane, a general in the United States Army, had expected a completely different reaction than the one the young man had shown him. When the nurses and his own daughter told him the boy had woken up, he expected the boy to destroy the place out of confusion or because of his time in cryogenics. He hadn't expected to see him sitting, staring at the landscape through the window, completely calm, unconcerned about the nurses or about everyone around him, as if they weren't there. He didn't seem to mind being surrounded by strangers, so the general deduced that the boy thought he was still on Krypton, in one of its cities. Shouldn't he have realized this, given the technology used by his own people and the one they used? That question was on the general's mind as the nurse performed a final checkup on the boy, awaiting Clark's arrival. His son-in-law had been notified by his daughter only a minute earlier, so he deduced he was speaking with the rest of the heroes about flying back to Earth and observing their relative, another survivor of Krypton's destruction. Despite the complete destruction of Superman's home planet, several Kryptonians had survived, with Zod and his forces outnumbering Clark and Kara, who had served Earth to protect it, although the latter was still in her late teens and almost finished with her time at high school. This had struck fear into General Lane's mind. Based on the probabilities time had shown, most Kryptonians had followed a path opposite to the one Clark had chosen, placing Earth and its inhabitants above their own well-being. Somehow, the likelihood of the boy, Guile, ending up like Zod was too high, so much so that countless morally questionable thoughts ran through the man's mind. He couldn't harm his son-in-law, the father of his only grandchild. Nor could he hurt the man married to his daughter. But the well-being of the world seemed to walk a fine line that Clark was playing along, as if nothing were going to happen. The number of times a ship landed on Earth without a global confrontation could be counted on the fingers of one hand. Samuel Lane let his worries not overwhelm him. The Ark was the talk of the upper echelons, and all relevant information about the new super was being passed on like wildfire to unfriendly departments, one of them being the one headed by Waller. Amanda Waller. He couldn't think of a worse person to look after the Kryptonian boy. Waller's dedication to the government was something many praised and respected, something he even went so far as to take Amanda on as a co-worker. But creating a team of villains to stop heroes like Superman. Samuel knew that if Waller found out about the boy, she'd do everything in her power to get her hands on him and use him as an anti-Superman, something that had been looming around the barracks for the past few hours. Information spread like a disease. When Samuel took the Kryptonian boy into custody, the higher-ups already knew about his existence, his features, and his age, and he had been unable to do anything to stop it. He didn't have the political power to do so, despite being the direct liaison between Superman and the government. All of this was going to turn into a headache. General Lane could see it and feel it. Working to keep the boy out of the public eye was going to be more cumbersome than maintaining his son-in-law's identity as Superman. Clark will be here shortly. Clark Kent, his son-in-law, a reporter assisting the famous Lois Lane, the most beloved journalist at the Daily Planet, was none other than Superman himself, the Iron Man, the image and pillar of the Justice League. The information about his identity was something that surprised Samuel when she finally told him. Knowing that his daughter was getting married, that she loved Superman, was a direct blow to him, understanding that his Lois would not have an easy life after their union, and that she would not find all the peace she sought with Clark. Despite the unfavorable points, he did not oppose his daughter marrying Clark, even though he was the representation of justice itself, of the good that Clark's parents instilled in him, something that calmed the general's heart to a certain degree. Did he say anything? Lois Lane was a woman with dark brown hair, eyes slightly lighter than her back-length straight hair, and a slightly rounded face with feminine features. A legacy inherited from her father, Lois was a strong-willed woman, willing to do anything for the truth, even going so far as to push boundaries and risk her own life, something General Lane himself admired in his own daughter. No. He hasn't taken his eyes off a fixed point in the window, as if he were waiting for something. Samuel now looked at his daughter, leaving only the boy with the messy hair. It's as if we don't exist. Despite that attitude, the doctors have indicated that he is fine both physically and mentally. A sigh of relief escaped Lois's lips. She'd been worried about both the boy and Clark. If her husband's relative had suffered in any way from cryogenics, Clark would probably have been devastated. Lois knew her husband too well. She knew his feelings, his thoughts, and how he would react to certain situations. Being used to Clark, she knew how he would react if the boy had suffered anything from his time in a cryogenic coma, a huge block of human ice on a ship buried in ice for 30 years. The surprising thing about this was that the boy hadn't suffered any damage. No scarring or damage from cryogenics was visible, and the scan results hadn't revealed anything about the boy's brain beyond normal stability. Lois thought that, for further analysis, Clark should take him to the fortress. The Fortress of Solitude was Superman's home on Earth, a small piece of Krypton brought on the ship that brought Kal-El to Earth when he was sent by his biological parents shortly before the destruction of their planet. It featured a hologram of Jor-El generated by a piece of the crystalline gem embedded in Kal-El's ship. The same gem was what raised the fortress at a point far from Earth. His existence was unknown to most of Superman's heroes and acquaintances, being revealed only to his wife and best friend. Because of this, Lois believed the fortress could better assess young Giles' condition and gain more information about the damage he might sustain due to cryogenics. It's like I'm not afraid or confused. The young man had been staring at the window and the surroundings ever since he opened his eyes and sat up in the hospital bed. He hadn't made a single gesture or looked away for a second, as if he were concentrating on what was happening outside, as if he knew something was going to happen. It could have been due to brain damage, but signs of psychological damage had been ruled out by the doctors who examined him. He was completely healthy, unharmed, and showed no signs of fear or confusion. Can he even feel anything? Samuel Lane frowned. Kryptonians were strange beings with even stranger behavior. Most of the ones he'd met had tried to kill him along with the rest of the people of Earth, and he'd only met two who'd put Earth above their own safety. I haven't met a single one of them who was normal. There was no stable history of Krypton that they could know of, and most Kryptonians had been potential genocidaires, beings with powers beyond imagination who had attempted to take over the world. The general knew that, if Superman wanted to, he would bring them all to their knees, murder them, and almost no one would be able to stop him. He doubted even his fellow League members could stop him. Sorry I'm late. The wind ruffled Lois Lane's hair and lifted the leaves a nurse was carrying into the air, causing them to fall onto the cold floor of the building. Still wearing his suit, Clark Kent greeted both his wife and the general. He has shown no signs of recognizing us, of fear or confusion. According to the tests performed on the boy, his mental and physical condition appear to be stable. Completely healthy. That was the diagnosis we obtained after several hours of study and examinations, some of which were repeated. Clark stared at the boy for several seconds. He, too, hadn't noticed anything strange upon entering. Nothing except his gaze. The boy's eyes were glued to the window, watching and studying everything that was happening outside the hospital, outside the window. Have you been looking out the window for too long? Since he woke up. We don't know if it's because of any damage or not. As I told you, according to the tests, he's completely fine. Maybe he only speaks Kryptonian. Lois's question reached the two men. It was one of the many possibilities they had, but they hadn't considered it. The odds that the boy only spoke Kryptonian due to his time in cryogenics were too high. He hadn't studied or trained to speak like an earthling, and it was possible the boy wouldn't understand anything. I can try speaking to him in Kryptonian, but it's also possible he's taken some damage we're not seeing. I should take him back to the fortress once I engage him in dialogue. As his wife, Clark had thought about performing a second examination at the fortress to ensure the boy was completely healthy and unharmed. Only there could she truly see if her relative's system was completely stable. It's lovely. The three adults fell silent at the faint teenage voice. Lois looked at the young Kryptonian. A tear had begun to fall from her right eye, running all the way down her chin, dripping onto the sheet. I'll. Naruto. The boy wiped the treacherous tear with the back of his hand. At Clark's call, the young man from Krypton gave the name that had been on his mind the whole time. It wasn't Guile, or he didn't feel like it was him. It was linked to Naruto's name, although he couldn't explain the tightness in his chest he felt every time he thought of that name. Naruto. Clark frowned slightly at the Japanese word. How could the boy know her? He had no idea, didn't know exactly why he knew her and why he had called himself Naruto when his Kryptonian name was Guile. So, Naruto, how are you? Naruto didn't answer the question right away. He mused over the answer. How did he feel? How was he? He didn't feel any pain beyond a slight itch in his head, as if he was having trouble concentrating. He couldn't remember how he'd ended up in that bed, nor did he know where he was or who was around him, but he didn't see them as a threat to him. Strangely, he felt stronger than usual. I'm fine. There was hesitation in the answer. Clark could tell how hesitant the boy was when he answered. He was confused, puzzled, and disoriented. Do you feel any pain? If by pain you mean whether I feel anything from a wound, I can say that I feel no physical or mental pain, Naruto replied with slow but concise words. I'm completely fine. Clark noticed the strangeness of those words. They didn't convey any emotion, and they didn't even carry any force. He looked at the boy. He saw his blue eyes and his calmness, as if he were thinking about something more important than answering his questions. He needed to take Naruto, as he had called himself, to the fortress. The second examination would give him the chance to understand his familiar, to understand everything about his physiognomy and whether he had any internal injuries, which seemed unlikely. Do you remember anything? Anything from home? Do you know where you are? Lois asked directly, scanning the boy's face to see his confusion. But she saw nothing. The boy's eyes, his face, everything seemed completely normal, just as it had been seconds before, just as when he'd woken up. He was completely relaxed. His features showed calm, understanding. No, I don't have any memories beyond the name Naruto. I feel like it's mine, the young Kryptonian pointed to himself. At the mention of the Japanese name, both Clark and Lois watched as his face contorted in confusion and pain. It was the first expression they'd seen on his face since waking up, as if remembering caused him some kind of strange pain. There's nothing in my head. The information you need isn't in me, I'm sorry. Memory loss. Both adults understood that they would be unable to extract anything from the boy. After 30 years in a vegetative state due to cryogenics, the boy's mind had been completely emptied of any memories he had of Krypton or the Ark, erased without a trace. Maybe in the fortress I can recover my memories. There were no machines or methods on Earth for people to fully recover their memories. Doctors simply left such recoveries to time, reaching a point where recovering memory could be completely impossible. Perhaps on the fortress, coming from Krypton, there might be a method that would allow the young man to regain all his memories. They needed Naruto's memories to understand what the Ark was. Even Clark understood that that enormous ship hid nothing good. He'd felt it in his body. His instincts had screamed at him when he'd entered and found Guile, compelling him to leave the ship, to abandon everything inside. Don't you remember who put you on the ship you arrived on? I don't know anything about any ship, Naruto looked at Clark Kent's face. There wasn't a trace of deception in the young Kryptonian's cerulean eyes. His mind was blank, as if he'd been born when they took him out of the cryogenics capsule. Is he supposed to come here in one? He could speak. He understood the Earth language. Both Clark and Lois didn't understand how he could understand the Earth language, how he could know certain words if he had lost everything that should be in his mind. Maybe he was being educated inside the cryogenic capsule. Yes. Your home planet, your home, is Krypton. Krypton. The word held no concrete, real meaning in the mind of the young Kryptonian of 15 biological years. Clark could see that he hadn't aged and appeared to be the same age as his son Jonathan. A 15-year-old teenager, maybe a little younger or a little younger. Age was difficult to gauge. I don't remember anything about Krypton, the Kryptonian sincerely looked at both adults. His voice was clear and calm, full of sincerity. Strangely, Clark compared his relative's voice to that of Bruce, his best friend. There were distinct contrasting nuances. The only thing I remember, or the only thing I can access in my mind, is the word Naruto. I know that, in some way, it's my identifying name. Kryptonian names had always been strange, with the family name being the name of their own house. Because of this, Clark found it odd that his relative had received a name outside of Kryptonian culture, one more associated with Earth's Asian culture, and it made him wonder where he had gotten it. There was one possibility Clark hadn't considered, but Lois had considered. Perhaps, during the 30 years the boy had been cryogenically frozen, he had been awakened previously. Perhaps he had awakened himself and learned the name of a deceased person, or perhaps of someone he considered a friend. But it was an option he had to rule out. Only a Kryptonian could enter the Ark and open the cryogenic chamber where the young man had been. Discarding that sole option, they were still as they were at the beginning. No one knew where the boy had gotten that name that came from Earth, which left the boy surrounded by questions, unknowns without a simple answer that could be obtained quickly. It doesn't matter, Clark sighed. From now on, we're going to take care of you, Naruto. Chapter 4. The Fortress of Solitude was located in a remote location far from all terrestrial life in the Arctic. Cold, resembling a castle entirely made of pure ice, the fortress emerged from the frozen ground when Clark Kent released the Kryptonian crystal his ship carried with him. Like an activating key, it caused Superman's cold headquarters to appear, always guarded by the holographic image of Jor-El, Kal-El's biological father. The fortress was completely deserted and cold, a representation of what the surviving Kryptonians felt after the destruction of their home and the near extinction of their species. Standing guard at the entrance were two enormous ice statues representing Kal-El's parents, welcoming any casual visitor. However, only their son and daughter-in-law had ever visited the area without any concern, as few truly knew the location of this icy fortress. Superman used the fortress to learn about his powers in Krypton. Jor-El had been his instructor, his doctor, and his advisor on various missions involving Kryptonians over the years. History, science. The Fortress of Solitude boasted hundreds of years of Kryptonian history and methods for conducting studies on the bodies of Kryptonians who entered it. Thanks to the latter, Superman was able to regain his powers and heal himself on a couple of completely desperate occasions. Because of these occasions, the Man of Steel had made it his priority to have Naruto brought to the fortress once he was discharged by Samuel Lane and allowed him to take him to his base so he could study the boy. Both Clark and Samuel saw nothing strange in the 15-year-old's behavior. He had completely lost his memory and he had linked his name to a completely Earth-like name of Asian ethnicity without having previously been awake on Earth. These were strange things, but not enough to cause them to worry too much. He didn't seem to be a threat to the safety of the planet and its inhabitants. Clark had complete faith in the goodness of his relative, his cousin or nephew. The boy's blue eyes never showed malice and his words were always sincere, without a trace of lies. General Lane attributed this to the fact that the young man had completely lost his memory, to the fact that he had no recollection of who he had once been. But his son-in-law was certain it wasn't because of that. Those blue eyes, every time he looked into them, were like looking into two sun-drenched wells, completely calm and devoid of negative feelings, which denoted the Kryptonian's optimism and the Earthling's pessimism. Lane had reason to believe the boy might be another kind of conqueror, a supervillain. General Zod of Krypton was the second Kryptonian they had met and, followed by his loyal comrades, he attacked Earth in search of the Codex, an object with which he intended to restore Krypton to Earth. If Clark hadn't confronted him and sent him to the Phantom Zone, the entire Earth would now be completely dominated, controlled by Zod's Kryptonian followers. It was this event that cast doubt on the general's mind. Only two Kryptonians had turned out to be good, kind to Earth, and the rest were deranged, seeking complete control of Earth, bringing back Krypton, and destroying humanity in the midst of their plans. And this was something Superman knew perfectly well. But being the embodiment of good, he couldn't be pessimistic like other heroes, like General Lane himself. Even Lois preferred to follow her husband's optimism rather than be swayed by her father's pessimism. Dial was going to be a boon to Earth, another hero who could make a difference if he wanted. Clark wasn't planning on allowing his kinsman to do anything against his will, against his wishes. If he followed the path of another Superman, he wouldn't stop him at any time, under any circumstances. He'd already made the decision to be his legal guardian, his father on Earth, so as not to leave him in charge of the state. His relationship with General Lane was completely healthy and unblemished, but he wasn't foolish enough to trust all the country's rulers and leave him in the hands of those men and women. They might end up turning guile into a weapon in their hands, a second, improved Superman who followed the capital's directives. Do you have everything? Lois Lane stood in the crack of the door, waiting for the memoryless Kryptonian boy her husband had decided to take into their home, something they had to tell their firstborn, but hiding the information that he was an alien and a relative of Superman. Both adults had to invent a story about this new inhabitant in their home. Naruto was a distant relative of the Kents, the son of Jonathan Kent's brother who had traveled to Japan and married a woman originally from Asia, completely losing contact with his older brother until the appearance of his son, now orphaned and without his parents. It was a far-fetched but white lie. They both preferred to keep the fact that he was an alien a secret. If Jonathan found out Naruto was an alien, Clark would have to share his ancestry, the fact that he was Superman, something that would make up for the times he wasn't home for some dinners and lunches, for some truly important moments. Yes, I have everything. Clark had taken charge of buying him clothes, of preparing a small bag with some changes of clothes, so he could leave the hospital with something other than the young man's non-existent Kryptonian suit. I hope you like the countryside, that you really like animals. We're going to be living on Clark's family farm. The Kent's old farm. Upon arriving on Earth in their escape ship, Clark was found and adopted by the Kents, a loving couple from Smallville, who had no qualms about raising an alien baby to adulthood, hiding all information that he was an alien, a resident of Krypton, even though no one ever asked them to. Lois acknowledged that the Kents had been wonderful parents to Clark, supporting him in everything he wanted to do and everything he wanted to show off. Martha, his mother, supported him when he traveled to the fortress as a young teenager and was by his side until his strength failed him, until nature saw fit to separate them. It was Martha herself who made Clark return to Smallville, and she, as his wife, supported him in his decision, even though it was too abrupt a change for her sons plural, because now Naruto was another member of the family. Sensing that the boy needed to feel loved, Lois wrapped her right arm around the young Kryptonian, pulling him into a light hug that allowed the boy to escape if he felt completely uncomfortable with the touch, something that at first seemed like it was going to happen. Naruto shifted uncomfortably at the touch, feeling strange and alien to him. A warm feeling washed over him seconds later, causing his body to relax, allowing Lois to deepen the embrace slightly. I know you have no memory, that you're on a planet other than yours. The woman opened the passenger door of the truck, shifting her backpack into the back. But we're going to help you learn about us. Clark is going to help you adapt and understand the customs of this planet. We'll also help you with your memories, with your current amnesia. Lois highly doubted the boy could remember anything about Krypton, the Ark, or his parents. He'd spent 30 years in cryogenics, hidden completely in layers of ice and snow, away from any help. She knew her husband was optimistic, but sometimes you had to be realistic. Spending so many years in cryogenics had somehow affected the boy's brain, his system. The first symptom was the amnesia he was suffering from, and if they continued along those lines, other symptoms could appear over time, something neither she nor Clark wanted for the boy. Thank you, Lois. It was surprising to hear Naruto fluently speak the Earth language, one of their many languages. He didn't seem like an alien, someone from outside with amnesia. That cast doubt on the fact that he hadn't been in some kind of training, constantly learning about Earth while in hibernation. You're Clark's family, and therefore, mine. Lois wasn't lying. According to Kryptonian civilization, Guile belonged to the same house as Clark. The House of El, and, according to that, he made them both family in a way. Because of this, she now considered him family, someone to care for, protect, and teach when necessary. Clark had the Kents, and Naruto would have them. Naruto took his place as co-pilot shortly before Lois started the vehicle, and they set off towards the Kent home, a surname that was added to the papers that were requested to allow the boy to live with Lois and Clark without any problem, something that General Lane achieved without many obstacles from his superiors. Legally, the young Kryptonian now had the name Naruto Kent on his birth certificate and ID, having been born 15 years earlier in Kyoto, Japan. Samuel Lane hadn't done any in-depth research and simply gave the boy an origin in a city known to many people, both inside and outside of Japan. If anyone investigated the boy's true identity, it would take years to understand that he wasn't from Earth, that he hadn't even existed until that moment, that it was all a fabrication to hide the fact that he was Kryptonian. Only a few people knew about this, and they would keep it completely hidden, away from the public eye. Jonathan is an athlete, a quarterback on the high school football team. Lois and Clark had many discussions about this. Jonathan might have Kryptonian powers, but so far their firstborn hadn't shown any signs of being like his father. It was only thanks to that they had allowed him to play, something he was incredibly good at. And now he wants to be one in Smallville. It's the best he's ever been and what he wants to do in life. Jonathan Kent was famous at his former high school. Beloved by his classmates and teachers, he had been elevated to a completely different position. Following in his father's footsteps, the boy demonstrated tremendous skill at football and immediately stood out on the team, earning him that privileged position. Lois lamented having to leave everything behind: his friends, girlfriend, and the football team, and knew he would have a hard time for the first few weeks, maybe even the first month. It was never easy to leave everything behind and start over, with nothing to hold on to in the first place. He wasn't forthcoming. Lois could understand why. Out of the corner of her eye, as she drove, she glanced at the boy. Naruto was staring out the window, watching the changing landscape, the trees, the cars, and the buildings they passed as they traveled toward Smallville, toward the Kent farm. He was calm and relaxed, as if he was thinking about his own problems, his actions, or what he wanted to say next without it being a single monosyllable. Lois, the young man from Krypton, pronounced the name of Superman's wife perfectly. This wasn't what surprised the award-winning journalist. It was the fact that Naruto was calling her by name and referring to her with something more than a simple "hm." "Why are you doing this for me? You yourself don't know me, and Clark is forced to because we're related. There's no need for you to have to deal with my custody as well." Lois hadn't expected those words. She didn't sense the boy's words were meant with any kind of emotion or malice. She only found a question filled with curiosity, a curiosity that needed to be satisfied by her, who was there right now. But what could she say to him? The reasons she and Clark had for adopting him, for taking custody of him, were exactly what the boy had mentioned. They were related. But she had to add to that the fact that the boy wasn't completely healthy. He had no memory, no recollection of who he really was, and his very identity had been altered. In Clark's moral compass, abandoning a family member in need would not have been a good idea. When Kara arrived on Earth, Clark sought out a family to care for her Earthling parents. With Naruto, it was slightly different, but at the same time, it was the same situation, except Clark wasn't going to seek out parents among his acquaintances. Instead, they themselves would be the boy's parents, his legal guardians. Lois loved her husband for that. He was such a kind-hearted person, so kind that he could be considered a complete idiot, a completely ridiculous and non-existent man. "Naruto. We're your closest family. Clark is willing to help you with your memory loss, and we're both willing to accommodate you and be your full guardians. It's not an obligation. It's something we want to do. Don't try to see this as if we're forcing ourselves, that we're creating this out of something completely self-imposed. You yourself need help, and Clark is one of the few people who can provide that help." Lois sighed. She hadn't wanted to venture into the unknown, but if she wanted to convince the boy at her side, she'd have to tell him about Krypton, about her powers, and how dangerous it could be if they were unleashed in inappropriate circumstances, something that became even more dangerous when her amnesia was added. "Krypton. You're a Kryptonian, Naruto, an alien. You weren't born on this planet, which we call Earth." Clark had told him a little about Krypton and his own powers, how they came from the same yellow sun and made him an almost invincible being if it weren't for the kryptonite scattered after the meteorites. On your home planet you could have passed as a normal boy, another Kryptonian teenager without powers. But here you are not considered a normal teenager. Your cells absorb the light from the sun, making them activate and obtain better abilities than a normal human, reaching the point of manifesting powers that border on the unimaginable. Super strength, the ability to fly, invulnerability. You are a living weapon that could be used by anyone with a twisted mind. Her father, General Lane, had been overly skeptical in allowing Naruto to leave the hospital and the surveillance on his own. The memory of Generals Ott and some other Kryptonians was still fresh in her mind and in the minds of the government's high-ranking officials. And she understood why they were skeptical, what their concern was about. They had the president himself to thank for allowing the boy to leave the government's radar. "I'm just keeping a close eye on what might happen. It's understandable given that my origins and who I really am are unknown." Naruto's mind worked like a Kryptonian's, like Clark himself. At a speed greater than that of a normal human. But that would be something typical of an average Kryptonian. Naruto was a super Kryptonian, someone superior within his own race. Unlike Clark's own mind and that of other similar Kryptonians, the House of L had been scientists, Kryptonians dedicated to advancement. Naruto's mind worked differently. It was faster, with superior thought processing that allowed him to deduce and draw conclusions in mere seconds. People like Jor-El would have credited the boy with the title of genius within his race. By Earth standards, he should have been regarded as a super genius, someone several steps above them. It's a good way to ruin something. You're not under strict surveillance, even though it may seem that way. Clark wants to take you with him to the fortress, the only place on Earth with the knowledge necessary to assess your condition and the path to your own recovery. Neither she nor Clark had considered the possibility that the boy might not recover. That possibility could happen, that his memories might not return, leaving him completely stranded on the path to his own identity, to who he truly was. If that was the case, Lois knew Clark wouldn't stop, that he wouldn't let the boy fall apart, and that he would create a new identity for him, a new role he'd fully fit into. They weren't going to fall apart just because of that. So. Naruto. Clark wants you around to help you when your powers return, when you need the help no one else can give. There are no one else like you on Earth. Clark and Kara are the only Kryptonians who can help you, the only ones of your kind still alive and sane enough to help someone without seeing a possible opportunity to control that person, the planet. General Zod would have taken advantage of this opportunity. He would have tried to control Naruto and use him as another member of his army, another living weapon. Zod's supremacist ideal would have passed on to Naruto without him being able to assimilate it. It would simply be there, and everything inside the arc would be in the cruel Kryptonian's hands. That's completely understandable. Naruto was unaware of the capabilities he might gain when his Kryptonian powers awakened. He didn't know for sure what he could do, beyond a simple understanding of enhanced strength and physical attributes, far superior to those of a human. Perhaps one of his powers could cause the destruction of a planet, a city, or an entire genocide. You could try to be more cheerful. Watchtower. The Justice League had been keeping an eye on the Ark for the past few days. Kryptonian technology was a factor they hadn't counted on, something that could have completely changed the game they were playing with the villains. If even one of the ship's potential weapons had been obtained by a villain smart enough to understand it, it would have created chaos in which they would have become completely involved simply for being heroes, the protectors of Earth. Another of the group of heroes' concerns had been the boy who had come aboard the Ark, the giant frozen ship that was the main focus of their worries. Clark had mentioned that the boy had no memories of who he was, something that would have told them how to advance within the Ark and obtain its secrets. There was also no memory of who the boy really was, or why he chose to call himself Naruto and not by his Kryptonian name, something Clark accepted without hesitation. There were many unknowns surrounding the boy. It was unknown what mission had brought him to Earth, whether anyone had accompanied him, or if he had simply gotten lost en route to another living planet where other Kryptonian survivors, perhaps an entire army, were waiting for him. You look constipated, Bruce. Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, was the most skeptical member of the group regarding the appearance of another Kryptonian alongside a massive alien ship. Whenever a ship with technology beyond human understanding appeared, trouble always seemed to follow. Are you still thinking about the trouble the boy could bring with him? You're being way too paranoid, buddy. Barry Allen, aka Flash, was a cheerful, joking, and optimistic hero. Like Superman, Flash didn't expect the new Kryptonian to pose a serious problem for them. Unlike Zod, Naruto was just a lost teenager, with no memory or understanding of who he really was. Superman's influence would be completely beneficial in counteracting whatever bad things the boy had in mind once he regained his memories. The last Kryptonians to show up weren't necessarily kind to us, Flash. General Zod destroyed a city and caused hundreds of deaths. That's just counting what Zod did. Bruce remembered the deaths of his employees, some of whom had been at Wayne Industries for years and had known his parents. And it was for them that he openly confronted Superman before forming the Justice League. You're a pessimist, Bats. Let's see what the boy is really like, what the future holds for him, shall we? Don't screw things up with your constant frown and boring attitude. Barry patted his partner on the back. He sincerely hoped Superman's new guy would be a good Kryptonian, someone who could carry the weight of the new generation of heroes being formed under their watch. Though he didn't really expect the kid to want to follow in Superman's footsteps, to be a hero for Earth. We'll see. Batman's skepticism, much less his paranoia, couldn't be completely erased. Superman was his best friend, one of the few heroes he considered a true hero. But all of this was enforced by Clark Kent's actions under the Superman mantle, not simply by optimistic ideas about what Superman might accomplish. This was the same case. The boy hadn't shown anything that gave him confidence. As a complete unknown, Naruto was treated by him as a possible danger to the world. Bruce's background had led him to think about it, but he was still willing to give the boy a chance. I just hope this isn't a mistake. Author's note. This is the alternate storyline of my Super Naruto story, as I indicated at the beginning of the story, therefore, it is a different Naruto, with completely different facts and behaviors than the original storyline, which also affects his group membership and his personal love life. Now, let's get to what I wanted to tell you. This story will probably end up being a Naruto x Supergirl, or that's what I have in my mind right now. However, until Naruto meets Kara, there are still like 4 to 5 years left in the story, and it clearly won't be his first couple or love interest that will appear in the fic. I have others in mind like Batgirl, Wonder Girl, Sarah Cushing. Since the first part of the story is based on the Superman and Lois series, I decided that this interest should be in the plot, although I don't know how many have seen the series and others. Even though I have everything planned, I am completely open to suggestions. Without further ado, I say goodbye. I hope you enjoyed the chapter. Chapter 5. Smallville was a beautiful town in Kansas that had been struck by strange phenomena after 2 meteor showers had hit the place, giving strange powers to the people of the town or to visitors who had been there during those periods, and that mainly were not too highlighted. With the appearance of the metahumans, it was implied that the meteorites from Krypton had unleashed the changes in the affected humans and that they had caused said evolution within the species, endowing countless people with strange abilities. Strange events had always surrounded Clark Kent since his teenage years and had driven him to become what he was today. Superman, the hero present in countless danger situations, always willing to help those in need. Unfortunately, this brought him various problems in his personal life, forcing him to put aside many of the things other teenagers were doing in their school lives. For both Lois and Clark, it was a relief to know that the strange occurrences had stopped. The metahumans had shifted their attention to the big cities, leaving small towns like Smallville free from the chaos they usually brought with their appearance and far removed from the maelstrom of trouble they heralded with their appearances, which Clark appreciated. It would be a little unfair to the 2 teenagers in his care to have to deal with people with powers and see their school lives ruined, much more so in the case of his son Jonathan. Although after years of being Superman, Clark doubted that trouble wouldn't follow him back to his hometown, which would be too much for him to ask. And although he had left his classmates in charge of Metropolis, the Kryptonian still wasn't convinced that the city was completely safe, but he preferred to spend some time at his family home rather than disregard his dying mother's last wish. Martha Kent had been a model woman. As Jonathan Kent's widow, Martha finished raising Clark until he was ready to leave the Kent household and helped many people in Smallville when they needed her help, being just like her husband in life. A wonderful person. Before moving back to the town, Clark had visited his mother just a few days before the arc appeared and the presence of a new Kryptonian brought changes to his life. With her last breath, Martha had asked her son to return to Smallville, to return to the home where he had grown up, and Clark hadn't had the strength to refuse her request, although it became slightly complicated with the appearance of Naruto in their lives. Clark had to thank his son-in-law General Lane. Thanks to his influence and that of the White House itself, his new relative's identity was completely covered up, erasing all record that he was an alien, that he hadn't been born and raised on Earth under the name Naruto Kent, the young son of his father's brother, which made him his young cousin, just as Kara was. Kara Zor-El was the 3rd member of the House of El to still be alive and to have survived the destruction of Krypton without an external factor that would have involved a resurrection on Clark's part in order to have a relative, which made the young woman's presence within Clark's family genuine. Despite being placed under the Danvers care, becoming known as Kara Danvers, the Kryptonians still considered Clark her cousin and continued to see him from time to time, which would force Clark to tell Kara about the new member of his family, both Earthling and Kryptonian, and which would probably result in genuine happiness for his cousin. After those two, the Kryptonians who had appeared on Earth had not been too kind and had forced them to fight, at least Clark. Kara had not yet revealed her Kryptonian ancestry, which was fine by Clark as long as she sought her own path. Not every Kryptonian who came to Earth was meant to be a hero to the planet's inhabitants. Clark was driven by the teachings of his adoptive father, Jonathan Kent, and followed his own path, always based on those teachings, always striving to be an example for the next generation. Just as Clark wanted Kara to find her own path, her own story, and her own passion, he wanted Naruto to do the same without being forced into a set path. His cousin should follow the path he deemed fit for him and become the man he deemed best. Clark hoped, though, that the boy wouldn't become like Zod, that he wouldn't try to turn Earth into New Krypton, and that he wouldn't wish to exterminate the human race. The Kents arrived at the Kent farm at dusk, watching from inside the car as the sun slowly disappeared over the horizon, giving the house a strange and melancholic look. The next day was Martha's funeral, and none of the 3 who had known her were in the mood to talk too much, although Lois tried to keep the trip lively and occupy the 2 teenagers in the back of the car with some things, which became complicated with a Kryptonian with a mind unwilling to follow a game he found too simple. Both Jonathan and Naruto had established a strange brotherhood between them and, as if they had known each other their whole lives, both teenagers had quickly gotten along, and there was no problem with Naruto's presence in Jonathan's life and vice versa, something that had calmed the 2 adults in charge. Lois wouldn't admit to her husband that she'd been worried. She was willing to help Naruto adjust to his new life and home. But as a mother, she was willing to take care of Jonathan over a Kryptonian boy who had barely entered their lives. She had to admit it was a selfish feeling, but even she saw the problem with the Kryptonians who came to Earth after Clark, and it was a fear that was very present in many people's minds, including the higher-ups at the White House, the same people who had approved Naruto's care. The 4 of them left the vehicle and began carrying their suitcases into the house. It had remained the same, unchanged, untouched. Martha kept everything exactly the way Clark remembered it. "You're going to share my old room." The house had 2 enormous floors. The ground floor contained a bathroom, the living room, the kitchen, and the dining room. Upstairs were a bathroom, the master bedroom, the guest bedroom, and the bedroom that had been Clark's throughout his childhood and adolescence, the same one that the two teenagers who followed him would occupy and share. For a while, both Clark and Lois had considered giving both teenagers space, but they rejected the idea until they were fully settled on the farm and could set up the guest room as a bedroom for one of the two teenagers under their care. This, of course, was communicated to both boys. Jonathan had found no problem sharing a room with his uncle and was willing to help him with the adjustment, just as his mother had requested. For his part, Naruto didn't have many problems sharing a room with another person. He hadn't done anything like this before and he found it fascinating, so he didn't object too much when Clark mentioned it to him. And no playing late into the night. The Kent's son pouted slightly as his mother's voice came from downstairs, causing Clark to chuckle slightly. Jonathan had taken it upon himself to teach Naruto video games, and they had been spending hours, many extra hours, playing some of the essential games for a teenager, or at least young Kent saw that playing Mortal Kombat was essential for a teenager of the time, and it was something that Lois was forced to stop when both teenagers came home one day wearing the same clothes as the day before. Bitter. Clark patted his son on the shoulder and placed the boxes containing both of their belongings on both beds. If you want to play soccer, it's best not to upset your mother too much or waste hours of sleep. Just like in Metropolis, Jonathan was ready to join the Smallville football team and return to one of the few things he enjoyed and was good at in the world. It was the world where Jonathan felt most comfortable and familiar. Well. The teenager slumped slightly. His shoulders drooped slightly and his scowl deepened at his father's threat. Early tomorrow morning we'll have your grandmother's burial ceremony. Help your cousin choose something for the occasion that won't stand out too much. Clark wasn't going to say much about his new familiar's favorite clothes. Apparently, for some truly strange reason, Naruto preferred any black and orange clothing that made him stand out a little above average, something that wouldn't be too nice at a funeral unless the boy was in some trouble. Okay, I'll take care of it, Dad. Jonathan dropped his backpack on what would be his bed for the next few months, and Naruto followed suit, dropping his bag on his own bed without much ceremony and proceeding to check out the room with genuine curiosity, as if he'd never been in a similar room before. This one wasn't too big. With two medium-sized beds, the room was perfectly divided for two people, leaving the right side for Jonathan and the left for Naruto, each having their own small space. Both teens also had a desk right next to the window, right in front of their beds, with a standard desk chair with a good backrest and a small amp, in case they needed to study too much at night without having to turn on the bedroom light. The bedroom closet, however, had to be shared by both boys. Since the room wasn't huge, some modifications had to be made to accommodate each of the teenagers. They couldn't have two closets, one for each, and so both had to share the same closet where they would keep some of their clothes. This situation wouldn't last long. Clark and Lois planned to do a little renovation on the house, and when they were finished, the guest room would be Naruto's, leaving Clark's old one for Jonathan. I think Mom left a suit in my suitcase that might fit you perfectly, I think. Young Kent's eyes moved towards his cousin. Naruto was slightly shorter than him, by about 2 centimeters. His body was somewhat wider due to his muscles, and his proportions were perfect, which would make it difficult for his old suit to fit him perfectly. It was even much more likely that it wouldn't fit. Why didn't my parents get you a suit? When Naruto was taken from the secret army hospital, Lois was tasked with buying clothes for the teenager, trying to use the boy's judgment when creating his wardrobe. However, the woman was soon forced to take the reins of those decisions. The young Kryptonian was too interested in orange and black to consider other combinations that would better highlight his features, eyes, or body. Yes, I bought it. At the threshold, Lois reached up, holding up a suit inside a bag that hid it from view. The woman unzipped it and revealed the clothes for Martha Kent's wake for the memorial service. Dad told me to lend him something. That's not necessary. And you're not the same size. Lois placed the suit on the Kryptonian's bed. Naruto was absorbed, staring out the window at the pastures that extended throughout the Kent farm, accompanied by the cows grazing peacefully undisturbed. That's obvious. Jonathan looked at his mother as if she were calling him an idiot, causing Lois to smile at her son's annoyed pout. I want both of you ready first thing in the morning to greet visitors. We'll have a send-off for Martha, and it will be our first event in Smallville. Naruto and Jonathan stared at Lois for a few long seconds. I don't want any further delays or problems, is that understood? The woman's eyes traveled to her son. Jonathan simply nodded at his mother's words before she left, letting out a sigh shortly after. I think it's best not to anger your mother. Jonathan looked sharply at the Kryptonian. Despite his cousin's advice, Jonathan couldn't deny that he was right. Both Naruto and his father had warned him not to anger his mother, and the boy wasn't about to miss the chance to play football again. And his mother could thwart his entry into the Smallville High School team and leave him without one of the few things that kept him even remotely focused. Yeah, it's best not to make too much of a fuss and just follow orders, he shrugged slightly, showing that he didn't mind too much. He'd already seen his mother angry and it wasn't the best of times. Let's see how the outfit my mother picked out looks on you, Naruto. I hope it really fits you and you don't have to exchange it for another one, which is what we would have done if I lent you something of mine. Your mother helped me pick out my clothes. Jonathan looked at his uncle cousin with some skepticism, not trying to hide his gaze. And despite that, why did you end up with so much orange in your closet? Lois had taken the reins during the time they were shopping for and selecting clothes for the young Kryptonian, however, the award-winning journalist soon realized that it was almost impossible to get it into the teenager's head that orange and black couldn't make a whole wardrobe of clothes. And as surprising as it seemed, Lois was finally defeated by a 15-year-old teenager, her son's age. But what could she do? The boy was so insistent that she ended up letting him put more orange than he could have on the counter, despite the fact that she was against all the clothes the boy happily placed there. I don't know. Your mother left me. The Kryptonian shrugged at Jonathan's disbelief at their response. Lois wasn't a woman to back down, much less with inexperienced teenagers like them under her care, which was how she always referred to Jonathan when he tried to be an adult. Really? My mom gave in to you? Is it that weird? I haven't seen her give in, not even to my father, the boy admitted, finding that information certainly unprecedented, like an event that wouldn't happen again for a long time. You must teach me your secret, cousin. The next day was going to be tough for the entire Kent family. Jonathan hadn't spent as much time with his grandmother as his father or mother, but she was an important part of his life, of his childhood. Clark, for his part, had been too attached to his mother. Since the death of his father, Jonathan, his mother had been his mainstay, before finding something similar in his wife Lois. The young Kryptonian couldn't fully comprehend the feelings or the significance of tomorrow. Lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about the feelings he would have to express the next day, how to behave with the rest of the people who would come to the wake of Kal-El's Mother of Earth, a woman who had raised a Kryptonian, shaping the hero Earth had today, with all that entailed. I guess I should be cordial to them like Lois and Clark have been to me. Before I closed my eyes for the first time in a long time, images appeared superimposed on the ceiling, as if I were watching a movie projected by a projector. There were two men. One wearing armor and the other wearing a long ankle-length medical or scientific gown. Neither seemed willing to give in, and they seemed to be arguing over the codex. Shortly after seeing the men arguing, the image blurred completely. Red eyes filled the space where the two men had been. A cruel smile split the darkness, revealing sharp teeth. The final judgment was near. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.